Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we take a closer look at the top political stories of the day. Ballotpedia connects people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for being with us. On Tuesday, November 7th, voters in Colorado, Kentucky, Maine, Mississippi, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Virginia went to the polls to decide on a variety of elections from state executives to state ballot measures. Today, I'm joined by Editor-in-Chief Jeff Pallais to help break down some of the results. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, Victoria. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. How did you spend your Tuesday?
Well, it's another election day. I think it's my 14th election day at Ballotpedia now. Who's counting? But I, went to the gym, took the kids to school, and I always like to have one errand on election day, something very low-key. It was exhilarating. I took the car in for servicing. Very, very exciting stuff. How about you?
I also worked out, and then in the past, I've, as our listeners may know, I have a Peloton. In the past, I've taken the Hamilton ride because it feels very patriotic on the day we're all going to vote to take the Hamilton ride. Yeah, then I took a nap because I was going to be up late and I got some caffeine and then hopped on to cover election results at 7 p.m. Speaking of election results, we're recording this on Wednesday, November 8th. So there's a chance that the results we're covering are going to be updated. But what are some of the highlights that we saw happen yesterday, Jeff?
Well, one of the highlights actually kind of relates to what you just said, which is that the results came in quite smoothly. We've been doing this for a long time now, and very oftentimes it's Wednesday afternoon and we're stuck with a lot of uncertainty about what happened the day before. And it was pretty smooth going for the election results in the states that we covered. There were tens of thousands of seats that we were covering yesterday at Ballotpedia. So there was a lot of elections to keep track of. And, if you're listening to this on Thursday and we're recording this on Wednesday, you probably know most of what happened. But just as a quick summary, sort of the higher level stuff, we know that incumbents won pretty comfortably throughout the day. The incumbent governor of Kentucky won re-election. The incumbent governor of Mississippi also won re-election. In Virginia, the Democrats took control of the state house and kept control of the state senate. And we know that there were quite a number of ballot measure results that I'll let you get into in a few minutes that were of interest. But across the board, it was a pretty comfortable day for incumbents. From my perspective and from where I think what we saw coming in, it wasn't entirely an unexpected day in the world of politics. But there were a lot of results. A lot of really interesting things did happen. So I'm excited to dig into it in a little bit with you. But why don't you tell us about the ballot measures? I'm going to flip it around and ask you.
Yeah, sure. So the most notable, or the measure that caught the nation's attention, was definitely Ohio Issue 1, which established a right to reproductive freedom. That was approved with nearly 57% of the vote as of this morning, Wednesday, November 8th. This will be the fourth state to establish a right to reproductive freedom. And there will also be another amendment in Maryland next fall on the same issue. Ohio voters also approved Issue 2, which legalized recreational marijuana, also with 57% of the vote. This makes Ohio the 24th state to legalize recreational marijuana and also pushed the majority of American population into states where marijuana has been legalized. And then in my home state of Texas, all but one of the 14 amendments on the ballot were approved. The only one that was defeated was Proposition 13, which would have increased the state judge retirement age from 75 to 79. One of the notable ones in Texas was the right to farm, and that was approved with 80%. So Texas becomes the third state to adopt a right to farm. And then Maine had 8 ballot measures on the ballot. Maine Question 2 was approved. It prohibited foreign governments from contributing to ballot measure campaigns. And then there was a conflict over electric utilities in Maine, and we saw 2 questions addressing that issue. Question 1 was approved, and that now requires state entities or electric co-ops to get voter approval before borrowing more than $1 billion. And then Question 3 was defeated, and that would have created the Pine Tree Power Company. And that was defeated with nearly 70% of the vote. Maine also approved a right to repair law, which is only the second state to do so behind Massachusetts. And then finally, another set of races that we were particularly interested in was ranked choice voting at the local level. And we saw East Lansing and Kalamazoo approve RCV measures. We're still waiting on Royal Oak, but right now the yes vote is ahead. And then finally in Minnetonka, Minnesota, they actually defeated a measure to repeal RCV. So a lot of interesting things happening at the ballot measure level. Quite
a lot. Yeah, I think I don't even know where to go next with that. Ranked choice voting, I think will certainly continue to be a pretty big topic. both the ballot box next year with ballot measures and probably in states with legislation. So that was a really interesting result to see. And in Texas, we haven't really gotten into it yet, but I think turnout was up in Texas. We'll have more of these numbers if you subscribe to the Daily Brew. We'll have that in the days ahead. But turnout in off-cycle election years like this one is usually pretty low. But I think in some cases it actually was a little higher than your typical off-cycle election.
Yeah, some of the news that I was reading earlier said that early voting was nearly double what it was in 2021, which was the last odd year election that featured constitutional amendments. Definitely increased this year.
Yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to go back to from some of the results from earlier was over in Kentucky. There's so much single party control nationally. Now we're looking like we're gonna have 40 trifectas when we head into next year, which will be the most in quite a long time. Most states either are single party controlled on the left or single party controlled on the right. But I'm always struck by votes where voters change their opinion for the party based on the office, where they split ticket voting, so to speak. And we saw that in Kentucky yesterday, where Governor Beshear won re-election. Looks like it'll be about 53% of the vote. So give or take 630,000 votes or so, maybe a little more when final vote certifications come in. But the Kentucky Attorney General, Kentucky Secretary of State, the other statewide offices were won by Republicans. So what you're seeing then in the state of Kentucky is voters were happy with incumbent Democratic Governor Beshear and voted for his reelection, but they didn't extend that same vote down the ballot. His coattails didn't extend down. They voted for incumbent Republicans or just challenger Republicans for other statewide offices. So you're seeing an interesting dynamic shake out in Kentucky there then, which again is not necessarily the trend we see in other state offices these days, where you're kind of typically seeing single issue voters or single party voters. So always interesting when that kind of thing happens.
Yeah, for sure. We saw millions of people visit our site this year like we do every year, but we're getting the sense here at Ballotpedia that folks are researching less these days about their candidates and ballot measures. So what do you think it means if Americans aren't researching their candidates and major issues as much as they might have used to?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating dynamic right now. We've seen this both on our end and we've seen it in the general political news industry. General traffic to political websites is down from prior years. That's not a sort of news breaking or a shocking thing. And one of the things that we wonder about that is this a byproduct of people becoming a bit more polarized and sort of hypercharged with their viewpoints, where they're no longer feeling the need to actually look information up about the issues before going to the polls? And it would be doubly interesting if we saw turnout go up with research go down. We've always thought that someone who comes to Ballotpedia in particular, we like to call them curious voters, because you are inherently curiously looking for information before you go vote if you're coming to Ballotpedia. And we love them for that. We think it's great. We're really happy to provide the service that we're able to offer. But if there are more people voting who are not looking up information, it's possibly because they're feeling like they know exactly where they stand on an issue and they don't need to go research it. You could take Ohio issue 1 as an example there. If abortion is the issue with that ballot measure, many voters will simply know exactly where they stand when they hear the one word, and they won't feel like they need to actually go read about the ballot measure. They don't need to go find out what are the arguments being given, what are the various supporters and opponents saying, where's the money coming from, who are the endorsements, what are the newspapers saying. They might just feel totally comfortable going to the voting booth and casting their ballot. So it's kind of interesting to think about what's that going to mean for the future of our elections. If voters are saying, I already know where I stand and I'm just going to go vote because I know where I fall on this issue.
Yeah, the undecided in the polls for Ohio issue 1 was pretty minimal, no more than like 12% that hadn't made up their mind prior to the election.
Yeah, I think those numbers, that the sort of curious population has shrunk from prior years. There was always a sort of grounded base on either side of issues, but that number seems to be kind of shrinking down and condensed. So I wonder how that's going to sort of shake out, both in terms of how electoral politics play out, but also in terms of, how do the different parties and campaigns try to reach the sort of swing voters, I guess you could call them, to use the old nomenclature. That's something we think a lot about here on our end, because we want to educate and inform voters, but they also have to want to be educated and informed and come looking for information. So how you solve that is an interesting challenge.
Yeah. Getting into sort of the mechanics of that exact problem, providing voters information. The main way we do that here at Ballotpedia is through the sample ballot. And we've kind of found it more difficult to provide that information in a timely way because we're getting that information from local government websites. So can you share with our listeners a little bit about that problem that we're facing in providing?
Yeah. So we've talked about this, I think, before on the show, but there are nearly 585,000 elected officials in the country. The vast, vast majority of which are local elections. And in many cases, extremely local. Dozens of people will vote to elect officials in some of those cases, if that. So what ends up happening is the smaller the office, in many states there's very decentralized control over the elections, which means the candidate list may not be available until days before the election. So from our end, there's kind of a complicated sequencing that has to happen. You've got to get the name of the candidates first. And then once you get the names of the candidates, we have to internally do something to get that information into our database. But then we have to unleash our researchers to go try to look up information about those candidates or about the ballot measures. But if you're not getting the information about who's even going to appear in the ballot until very close to the election, then you really only have a very tight window before which you can go look up relevant, useful, helpful information for voters before they actually have to go cast their ballot. And so in many cases, that tight window can make for a really complicated turnaround and can exacerbate the challenge. It's not enough for voters to just get names of candidates. They need to have information that helps them inform their vote. Who's endorsing that candidate? What are their stances? What do they believe in? Do they take the Ballotpedia candidate survey? Well, we can't get them to take their candidate survey until we have their name. So that is it's a really interesting challenge, just getting the names of the candidates. And, some states are better than others at this. Some states have centralized candidate lists that they release very early in the process. Some states don't make the candidate lists available until much later. Sometimes you have to go at the very local level, counties or even school districts themselves. And this year we were able to experiment a lot and to learn what works and what doesn't work as we continue to expand our efforts to cover more and more of our elections, to cover every single election in the country. So we barely even touched on ballot measures, your area, but this is a really exciting challenge for us to solve. And if we can get there, it will create a wonderful tool for voters to allow them to feel more prepared as they head into the ballot box.
Yeah, definitely. It's a problem we see at the local ballot measure level. I'm thinking of California, which is actually pretty good about getting their ballot measures posted early, but they get really ultra local, like fire districts that have tax questions that only 20 people vote on, but we want to provide a can't even say the word, colloquial.
There you go.
Yes and no box for them to really understand what.
California is a great example because I've had some conversations with we won't name names, but in California, what's been told to me over the years is that technically speaking, local jurisdictions are supposed to report up to the state any local ballot measures that they are having on the ballot. However, there is no enforcement mechanism for the state to make them do that, which means sometimes a local jurisdiction can just say, we're holding an election, we're not telling anyone, and the voters who want to vote will come to the polls and they will cast their ballot, but we're not going to tell anyone in the state that it's happening. So that presents an interesting challenge, enforcement of the rules around reporting and enforcement around the rules of notification. Some places are better than others at it, and there are a variety of different tools we can use to go get it, but information availability, it's really a challenge.
Let's get into also some of the mechanics behind reporting election results here at Ballotpedia. What goes into verifying our information to make sure it's all accurate?
Yeah, we have a very specific race calling policy at Ballotpedia before we put races results on site. We have a policy that our team is trained and follows for requiring multiple different sources to authenticate the results we're in using official sources or a list of media sources. And our goal realistically with this is, we're not trying to be the first out to call a race. We don't have people sitting at county offices counting ballots or anything like that. So we rely on a number of different sources before we will on our end call a race. And actually, you know this probably just as well as I do, Victoria, from your own work on it. So I'll let you fill in the gaps on anything I might have missed.
No, yeah, that about covers it. Here on the ballot measures team, we primarily use like the New York Times for state ballot measures and then local news outlets for local ballot measures to help us call races. My last question for you, Jeff, before I let you go, is what sort of analysis can our listeners expect from us over the next few weeks to really unpack these election results?
Yeah. So where do I begin? We've got a lot of exciting analysis coming up. The one I'm most particularly excited about is related to endorsements in school board elections. So this year, kind of expanding on what I was talking about earlier, we are covering comprehensively every single school board election in 7 states. That is going to allow us to do some really fun analysis on what shook out with those school board elections this on November 7th. Which endorsing sides were more successful? Which candidates were more successful? How many races were uncontested? That is in particular something that really we find to be quite alarming at the school board level. The vast majority of school board elections are uncontested. And we are going to be releasing over the next 6 weeks a report every 2 weeks from the states that we focus on. And you can click the link in the show notes to get access to which states we're going to be releasing. And one of my favorite and most interesting, I think, parts of that analysis is in some states, you can get access to a voter file. And then you can match up the voter file with the candidate lists and actually get a pretty clear sense of which party is effectively doing better in school board elections simply based on the voter registration of the candidates who are running. And that's a pretty interesting way to gauge and understand school board elections, which even though, many of those races are nonpartisan, political party registration information is just simply that. It's information. It's information to understand who the candidates are who are running for office. So it's true that offices can be nonpartisan, but people are not nonpartisan. People are ideological and people have opinions. And a political party is a proxy for information. And that goes along and helps inform voters and helps them understand what they're seeing on the ballot in front of them. So we'll be doing a lot of analysis on endorsements and ratings and pledges and party stances of school board candidates in the coming weeks ahead. And that's building on some analysis that we've done over the last several years in high conflict races of school boards, because school boards continues to be a very hot issue in the country. And I suspect it will continue to be next year. So that's one of the main analysis pieces that I'm very excited about. We also have a number of just sort of standard Ballotpedia analyses that you can find in our analysis hub, which will also be in the show notes, ballot measure analyses that you'll be working on, analysis from our elections analysis team on things like how did incumbents do and which races were really close. So a lot of standard exciting analysis like that to really help better contextualize this year's elections. And you can stay tuned for those in the next couple of months ahead.
Thank you for coming on today and sharing your time and expertise with us and kind of going into the mechanics of elections at Ballotpedia.
Yeah, it was good to see you. And now we're on to the next election cycle because, believe it or not, we already have 2 filing deadlines coming up in the next couple of days for the 2024 election cycle. So it's already time to start processing candidates and getting those primary ballots prepared, because when one election ends, another one begins.
Yeah, we have almost nearly half of the expected statewide ballot measures certified already. So yeah. And for our listeners, you can learn more about all these races and more by checking out the link in our show notes. We'll be back next week with another episode. Make sure you subscribe to On the Ballot wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for listening.